Michael Collins is with us. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Now, you're an expert on sugar addiction. What does that cover exactly?
Well, it's a good question. Sugar addiction is, not technically in all of the DSM five, or six, they call it, and it's a
Yeah.
diagnostic statistics manual, or the World Health Organization doesn't think of it as an addiction like they would alcohol or drugs.
Mm.
But there's a lot of science out now. The science is growing, and there's a lot of organizations. One I was the chairman of that are trying to get it named into these diagnostic manuals. But I like to say, sugar addiction. You have a sugar addiction if you think you have a sugar addiction. If you're
Yeah.
having trouble stopping, and you you just can't use the product without getting more cravings, and that you've sworn off it hundreds of times probably, and you still can't get more than a day or two put together of abstinence from sugar, then you might be a sugar addict. Yep.
Yeah. Would you say that most people are probably a sugar addict because it's in everything? And I guess the whole point of companies putting sugar in their products is so we buy more of it.
Well, you're 100% right there. And I would think that, yes. I think that biochemically, Toby, that I think that only about a third of people literally can't put the stuff down, and they eat it to their detriment. They get a couple 100 pounds overweight, they get diabetes, they get heart disease.
Yeah.
But then there's about another third of people who what we call harmful users, for exactly the reason you state there, is that it's in everything. It's in our culture, birth to death, every celebration, it's everywhere. And folks just, they never can escape it, right? It's like they cannot drink or they cannot do drugs.
Yeah.
But very rarely in today's society can you not eat sugar if you're just living your life. So yeah, very difficult to do that.
Yeah. Do you think the sugar addiction should be given the same treatment as things like drugs and alcohol?
I absolutely do. And I wouldn't have thought that when I first started this work, but a decade of doing it, and over 1,000 people detoxed, patterns start to develop, and the most disheartening patterns are the ones where people truly are 200 and 300 pounds overweight. The doctor says, they're losing limbs, they're going blind.
Yeah.
They cannot, they can't stop, even though the doc says they're going to die, and they still can't stop. So yeah, I believe, one of my mentors says you should be 18 years old and have an ID to buy sugar. And I think that's coming, maybe not in the next 10 years, but in the next 100 for sure.
That's an interesting point, because in the UK, I think a few years ago, they kind of started to, you had to be 16 to buy like really sugary drinks, I think, like energy drinks and stuff like that.
Energy, right. Yeah.
Most sugar products like chocolate and stuff, you're still fine to buy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, there is a lot of legislation in different places, especially for those energy drinks, which is a combination of another thing we kind of rail against is the caffeine.
Yeah.
When you combine those two, especially in a young person who's, not experienced, or if you will, eating or drinking so much, then there's been deaths, to be honest with you, with energy drinks. Now, sugar, no one can quite prove it, and it doesn't usually happen in the short term. Sugar's like long-term suicide.
Yeah.
Slow motion, long-term suicide.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Absolutely. Do you think the onus should be on the individual to try and help their addiction, or should maybe the government put taxes on sugar to make companies not put as much in their products?
Wow, what a great question. One we wrestle with all the time.
Yeah.
And a few of my mentors are, one of them he was a doctor to begin with, and he got a law degree in his 50s just to affect policy here in the US. And, because he believes that those laws and stuff will help. And I do think they will help. But personally, I believe that the only way that it's going to change is a grassroots movement where people basically start to understand the information that we're going to talk about today, and they start to do it themselves, and then they start to spread it to their friends and family, and that the programs like mine start to pop up everywhere. And we teach coaches, how to become sugar coaches. So yeah, I think it's more of a grassroots personally, but I think both of them are valuable. Both both things are necessary.
Yeah. And I suppose sugar's not like any of the other addictions where I'm assuming you can't go and check into rehab for it.
Well, it can now.
Oh,
Rebel Wilson, the famous Australian actress, did to a clinic in Switzerland. And so it does happen. And eating disorder clinics now accept people with binge eating disorder. Sadly, a lot of them don't treat it well and they do reduce the sugar. But getting off it, the answer to the question is for 99.9, if you're not a famous movie star,
yeah.
or wealthy, because a lot of them don't accept insurance for this, And so, you end up having to go through a program like mine where you have a group of people that you detox with and you learn how to stay off it, because that's where it's hard. A lot of people can get off it for a week or a day or 10 days or a month or whatever, but staying off it's the part that becomes a problem.
Yeah. Now, you're the founder of sugaraddiction.com and Quit Sugar Summit as well.
Yeah.
So what do those services do?
Yeah, no, thanks. The Quit Sugar Summit is something we've done every year for 6 years. And what it is, I've interviewed over 200 of the leading scientists, educators, doctors, MDs, PhDs, researchers, coaches, authors, anyone who has written or talked about and has researched and is an expert in reducing sugar, we have on the summit. And it's a great event. You can just go there and leave your name. It's just passed. I don't know when this will air, but today is actually the last day of an encore that we're doing.
Oh.
But you can go there and check it out. Maybe you'd be interested in the packages or whatever, but you can get there's 57 speakers each time we did it.
Wow.
And so it's pretty cool. And sugaraddiction.com is something I started about 10 years ago, and I gave good information and tried to help the folks get off the sugar. But it wasn't until about 3 years ago when I started providing coaching, both one-on-one and then in groups and stuff. And we grew a really big forum to about 7,000 people. We have Zoom meetings like this, 3 or 4 times a week. So people have this support system. So it's been working. It's growing pretty rapidly. There's quite a few people that have had, a couple years success and all the way down to a couple days success. So,
wow.
Yeah.
The type of people that are addicted to sugar, are they more likely to be addicted to arguably more harmful stuff like drugs and alcohol? Or is it just the fact that they're addicted to sugar and that's it?
No, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of science now starting to prove this, and that sugar indeed is the gateway drug. This is where people learn. There's a great YouTube video you guys would like. Eric Clapton, the famous guitar player, he owns a treatment center in Antigua, built it himself with his own money to help people, $7 million. Wow. And he talks about, the interviewer says, so Eric, this addiction thing, this started with heroin, right? And Eric says, no, Ed, it started with sugar. Oh. He said at 5 or 6 years old, he was drinking or eating bread and butter and sugar sandwiches to change his state. Now, remember that as we go on talking, he was changing how he felt. And so he knew that a substance could help him feel better. Yeah. And so then as he got older and he ran into beer and pot and everything, he started to use those to feel better. So there's a lot of science on this, Toby, a lot of science where people are using sugar. And if you ever talk to anyone who's lost 200 and 300 pounds, you can tell that they had to go through this process to reorder their emotional life. They could no longer use sugar to feel better. So I think it's an integral part of people getting, and there's a lot of research now on the opioid crisis of people having pretty severe sugar addictions that get attracted to opioids.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because comfort eating and a lot of other addictions aren't really helped if you've got depression or are going through some struggles. So they're kind of linked in that way.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because, the SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like the antidepressant medications that people are given, they're always trying to dial them in.
Yeah.
Meaning you take a half of this, you take two of these, you da, 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 da. Trying to make you feel a little bit better by changing your prescription around. They're like
Yeah.
playing with the dose, right? Well, in the last 5 years, the information about sugar has exploded as an effect that affects the nucleus accumbens, the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, all of these brain reward chemicals, exactly like heroin, exactly like alcohol, exactly like cocaine. They actually slide people into MRIs so they can see their brain light up when they sip the sugary drink, right?
Ooh.
And then they give them beer or alcohol, and the same exact receptors are lighting up.
Wow.
And so this is the real study of what is changing how people view sugar. So yeah, it's very real, very real.
Yeah, indeed. Are all sugars harmful and addictive? Because even something like lactose is actually a sugar, and some people are intolerant to it. But that aside, the ordinary person, is it harmful to drink milk?
No, well, we call them borderline foods, nuts and fruit and dairy, like you're talking about,
Yeah.
and grains. Our job really is to get them off of the white processed stuff.
Yeah.
And some folks cannot use dairy or heavy amounts of fruit, definitely no fruit juice or dried fruit.
Yeah.
So stuff that you wouldn't normally think is good for, that you would think was good for you. It drives people back to crave the whites, the powdered stuff. And so you have to be careful with it. Now, some folks can use it. Some use it like their methadone or their Suboxone. They kind of use it to bridge off of the sugar, and then they cut that back or whatever. And some people are able to, continue to eat dairy, continue to eat fruit, continue to eat grains. Vegetarians do. We don't have a lot of vegetarians, but the ones that we do have are successful in not eating flour and sugar. So, but they have to be careful of the other stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't know how it is in the US, I'm assuming it's exactly the same, but for diet versions of fizzy drinks, they replace sugar with stuff that's actually more harmful when you look at it. So, I mean, what should we do about that? Is that a terrible idea?
Yeah, they're basically a chemical experiment that no long-term studies ever figured out yet.
Yeah.
But here's a part when you're trying to get off sugar in general. And, we're drinking a lot of sugar in both the UK and the United States. They're averaging 20 teaspoons a day. And then if you got, Coke's got 12. So, you have 2 or 3 or 4 Cokes, you're way over, you're like 40 teaspoons a day or whatever. But, that said, you're looking at the, what do you call it? The fake sugars or whatever, even the stevias and the monk fruits and all that crap.
Yeah.
You're looking at a scenario where if you know what Pavlov's dogs are, where you're trained and, your body has this neural pathway that's literally grooved from your time you were a baby. When you taste sweets, you want more.
Yeah.
And when you taste the sweetness of these fake things, it usually, for all the people that we work with, draws them back to I call it high test, the real sugar. And so both are bad.
Yeah,
both.
Exactly. Can you quit sugar overnight? I'm assuming not, but
no, it is a process. It really does take time, and it's very real. The withdrawals are very real. When you get to be an adult, basically you're just fighting off withdrawals. You're not even really drinking it for a buzz or anything, or you're drinking it to feel better, but you're drinking it so you don't have withdrawals. Yeah. And so when you quit, about day 2 or 3 or 4, or both or all, you have a headache and you're kind of tired and you're a little bit blue, you're a little bit depressed, and you're hungry, you're ravenously hungry because your body wants to eat all this junk, but and even when you do eat real healthy food, you're still hungry. You're hungry right afterwards. And so it takes time physically to get to the other side of that. And when you do, then the mental game kicks in. You've heard all the science about when someone loses a lot of weight in the early days and then they gain it all back in the first year. Well, that's because they didn't really handle their sugar addiction. They white knuckled it. They got a few days or a month or weeks and they lost some pounds, but when some stressful situation comes back up, then they end up using it again. So it's something you got to be careful of. And it's reason we work with groups of people, because you do need that support, because a lot of times in your family, somebody's not, like, you could be the only one in the family that's not eating sugar, and you're living in a house with sugar all over, you know?
So is that kind of like a sugar relapse if you have a stressful situation and then go back to eating it?
Well, yeah, it absolutely is. But I have a mentor who's been on our summits many times, I think every single one. And she says that you can't really relapse with sugar until you got 6 months without it,
Yeah.
because it's just part of the process,
Yeah.
really. But, I personally like the drug analogy, like a relapse or whatever. But some folks want to do like harmful use reduction, but they call it harm reduction, right?
Yeah.
And they just want to cut it way down by 90% or whatever. And that's
Yeah.
harder to do it at the beginning, that moderating kind of have 10% that you used to have. It's easier to go 30 or 60, 90 days with zero and then just see how you feel. That's an
Yeah.
easier path for most people.
That's easier because if you have 10%, you just want to
Yeah.
eat more, whereas if you
Yeah,
have
you
none.
just want more. It sets up
Yeah.
the cravings. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, just remind us of the websites that we can check out Sugar Addiction and Quit Sugar Summit.
Yes, quitsugarsummit.com. Just leave your email and we'll notify you when the next one comes out. And then sugaraddiction.com. I've got a gift there. It's a book. It's my ebook. It's sold on Amazon. Was a bestseller for a while, but we decided to just give it away now, because we're helping a lot of people. And you can see a big yellow copy. It says The Last Resort Sugar Detox. Just click on that, and you'll be able to download the book for free at sugaraddiction.com.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.